Ivan Pavlenko, From Family to Family, Chapter 3, Part 9.1, At Party and Household Work, read by Natalia Buzova. In April 1959, I submitted an application in the name of the editor of the newspaper with a request to dismiss me from the position of the head of the agricultural department in connection with the examination session at the institute and the desire to switch to teaching work. Stendik obviously did not expect such an extreme step from me and started promising some relief, in particular to put the old Moskvich at my disposal. It had just been acquired by the editorial office. I did not agree. Then he asked to work for another 2 months until they would be sent an intern student from Kiev University. It was not for me either, as I had to prepare for the exams for the 4th year. I made it to the end of April and came home to my relief. After all, I had been working for almost 2 years without holidays. They had been absorbed by examination sessions which were not paid, since I did not study at the Faculty of Journalism, but at a pedagogical university. Over the next 2 years, the old editorial office was almost completely demolished and updated. In my place, they tried a girl zoo technician with a higher education for 2 or 3 months, but it did not work. She was replaced by a promised student intern who worked for about a year and then left for final exams and did not return. Editorial secretary Gruzin became a correspondent of the Republican newspaper Kolhosne Selo. Maria Danilivna moved to Poltava with her husband, who had got a new apartment there and worked in the department of original newspaper. Lubetsky, a literary worker, retired, and his quiet place was taken by Baikun, who could no longer handle the party department. Only Stendik still held the position of the editor. He managed to renew the staff, as at that time the districts were being consolidated. Lochvitsky included Senhansky and Chorushsky, so there were some people to choose from. And when Strelets, the first secretary of the party district committee, was fired, Stendik also retired. There were 2 months left before the examination session for the 4th year, and I sat down at the textbooks. At the same time, I was engaged in housekeeping, but not for long. In mid-May, the first secretary of the district committee of the party, Strelets, came to the collective farm party meeting. I guessed that he was up to something when he arrived himself. They called me to the office of the collective farm. I came in, said hello. I saw the communists who had already gathered. Strelets took me to the office, seated me down next to him, and, with the utmost kindness, revealed the secret of my invitation. The bureau of the district committee entrusts you with the party organization of the collective farm, and at the same time, you will be the deputy chairman of the board. I began to object because of the desire to work at school, to which Strelets replied, "School will not run away from you. You'll work for a year and then we'll see what you can do." There was no way out, and I agreed on the condition that in a year I would be allowed to work as a teacher. I took over the party organization at a difficult and responsible time. The head of the collective farm, Pavetkin, had just undergone a stomach ulcer surgery and was still in hospital. He was from the communist 20,000s, an engineer by education. During his presidency, the collective farm was strengthened. Labor-intensive processes on the farm were mechanized, and the construction of new livestock premises was launched. And in the hard work, he earned a stomach ulcer. After meeting him, I was convinced that he would not return to the collective farm and reported this to the district committee. Andrei Grigorovich Galivets, an agronomist and my best man, temporarily served as the head of the collective farm, but the district party authorities did not consider him mature enough for such a managerial job. That's why we waited and wondered what cat in a bag would be brought to us from the district. They brought Mitrofan Shovko, the former head of the collective farm, from the Parnitsky farm, which had only 30 yards. That dwarf collective farm had been annexed to Stepuki, and Shovko, with his 7-year education, had been sent to the regional 2-year school for the retraining of agricultural personnel, which he had just finished. In appearance, he was an ostentatious man, young, tall, with a nice face, pink, without a single wrinkle, but as it turned out later, he liked to drink alcohol. Nevertheless, at the general meeting, he was elected the head of the collective farm, and I was elected his deputy. We started in a friendly and energetic way. The main task at that time was to increase milk yields. An order came from the district party to graze cows on winter crops of rye and then wheat. It alarmed me. How can you make fun of bread? After all, we had enough natural pastures. We talked with Shovko and moved the dairy herd not to the wheat field, but to the meadows where juicy grass was growing, which was planned to be cut for hay. But Strelets flew in like a whirlwind. He swore at us in the presence of the shepherds and ordered them to drive the cows to the winter pasture. It was a pity to watch how livestock trampled the result of peasant labor. But what could we do? We were not the owners of the collective farm, and neither were those people who sowed and plowed, but all kinds of careerists with party tickets who were crawling out of their skins just to show that they were already catching up with America. Apparently, our Strelets was inspired by the laurels of Larionov, the first secretary of Ryazan Regional Party Committee, who had announced at the plenum of the Central Committee of the CPSU that his region would fulfill 3 annual plans for the sale of meat for the state. Khrushchev applauded him and urged others to follow the patriotic example of the people of Ryazan. In 1 year, almost all cattle, pigs, and poultry were slaughtered in the Ryazan region, and not only on the collective farm, but also in the private sector. In this way, the state received 3 annual plans. Larionov was awarded the Order of Lenin and the Gold Star of the Hero of Socialist Labor, and was also elected secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU for Agriculture. A year later, after that, Larionov shot a bullet in his forehead, since Ryazanshchina, robbed by him, could not provide the state with either milk or meat in the following years and barely fed itself. And what is interesting, when Larionov made promises and fulfilled them, there was a lot of noise all over the world. And when he destroyed his region and committed suicide, the party organizations learned about it only from a secret letter of the Central Committee of the CPSU. So Khrushchev's voluntarism was transmitted to regional and district bosses. A storming activity began everywhere, followed by show-off and cheating. The consolidation of some collective farms in the district began on the initiative of Strelets. It was not always economically justified, so it caused losses to individual farms. The neighboring collective farm, named after Budyonny, was torn into 2 parts, Stepuki and Parnitsky. The first was attached to Sveridivka and the second to us. A joint commission was created, lands were demarcated, livestock, pigs, sheep, and poultry were divided. But the premises turned out to be mostly placed in Stepuki and were joined to Sveridivka. Therefore, the local collective farm had to pay us 600,000 karbovantsov. But no matter how much we pounded the thresholds of the district committee and the district executive committee, we never received the promised money. In the meantime, all that livestock dowry arrived at the village, and there was nowhere to put it. It filled all the premises and was given to some people for temporary maintenance. It was necessary to build new buildings, but there was no money. I spoke at the party meeting and said that the consolidation benefited only Sveridivka Ukraine collective farm, which had appropriated the capital premises belonging to us without paying a penny for them. and our economy suffered some losses. It had been necessary not to tear up the collective farm named after Budyonna into parts, but to completely attach it to Sverydivka or to us. Strelets did not like my speech. In his closing statement, he accused me of not being responsible for the state of affairs on the collective farm and looking for a protective excuse for myself. On the second day, he himself came to us. He inspected all the farm premises and made a Solomon's decision. All surplus cattle should be sold for meat. I began to convince him that in such a thin condition, the cattle would be worthless. It was necessary to put it on fattening first, and not all of it, but only the part that was necessary to fulfill the annual obligation to sell meat to the state. After all, something must be handed in next year as well. In addition, the plan would grow 1.5 times as Parnitsky lands were added. But for some reason, Strelets perceived my arguments nervously, with anger. He clearly wanted the district to fulfill and exceed the plan for delivery of milk and meat that year. That is why he forced dairy cattle to graze on winter crops and sent the extra cattle to the meat processing plant. But these were only flowers in his adventurous plans. I will talk about berries later. We selected several dozen livestock, mostly bulls and culled cows, and sent to the account of a planned sale of meat to the state. All of them were below the average fattening rate, and therefore we did not get the money for them that we would have had if we had kept them for at least a month in the fattening area. A few days later, Strelets personally checked how his order was being carried out and ordered both breeding bulls to be sent for meat and the cows to be artificially inseminated. At that time, it was still being implemented and promoted as the best practice. We sent one bull, and the second one was transferred to another place away from the eyes of the authorities. A couple of days later, Strelets called, "Take the second one for meat." He found out that we had hidden it. Thus, our dairy head was left without natural fertilization. And there was little point in artificial insemination. Some cows became infertile, and it had a negative effect on their productivity. People took their cows to other people's villages and mated with young bulls. Such were the abuses of the bankrupt pentocrats.